Morning, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's joining us today. My name is Marie-Hélène Adrien. I'm the co-chair of EVALSDG, and it's a pleasure to have you all for this important launch. For those who are less familiar with EVALSDG, we're truly a network of practitioners and evaluators who are committed and absolutely advocating for countries to actually develop and use feedback mechanisms such as monitoring and evaluation to learn and to monitor their progress towards the 2030 agenda. And it is in this context that for us, hosting this particular event makes so much sense. It's only 5 years until 2030, but if you look at what this agenda is about, you might say that we still have a long way to go. Peace and prosperity for people and the planet. So it's very crucial that countries at this stage become empowered with such tools. I would like to thank those who've made that possible. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, the German Institute for Development Evaluation, IDEAS, and UNICEF. But behind those names are actual people. So I would like to really thank all colleagues, including Nia-Mari Heinonen, Ada Ocampo, thank you, Ada, Dirk Hoffman, and Thomas Rosmuller from UNICEF. And Thomas, a special thank for also all the work you've done to put this actual webinar together. A special thanks also to all the participants and the presenters today. And without further delay, I'll hand over to Thomas for the moderation of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie-Hélène. Let me restart our slideshow. So thank you for these remarks, Marie-Hélène. Pleasure to have you. And also thank you to everybody who joins us today on behalf here of the partners and the co-authors. Thank you for joining and engaging with us on this very important topic and the launch of our new and revised guidebook. My name is Thomas Rosmuller. I'm an Evaluation Partnerships and Capacity Development Specialist at the UNICEF Evaluation Office in New York, and I have the pleasure of moderating this session today for you. So Marie-Hélène already shared some points on the importance of this session, but as you might have read in the announcement, we do not only want to introduce to you the new and revised guidebook, but we also want to use this webinar, this online session, to discuss some very important topics with you in regards to evaluation. We found ourselves in a very changing and changed political landscape, which brings new crises and new challenges in different areas and sections, also including evaluation. And we want to discuss how evaluation can contribute to, first of all, remain relevant to good governance and to accelerate progress in the final years to the 2030 agenda. Before we dive into the session, we wanted to do a quick pulse check with you. I will launch a poll now, just to check in with you, and you should see it now, how you think and feel that the current changing global political context impacts and affects evaluation. Maybe for some of you, some of the challenges are very remote and there is not that much impact as of now. I hope it, and evaluation can proceed as usual. Some of us might feel already some limitations or see that evaluation and talking about evidence-based policy making has become more challenging. Some of us might be even in survival mode in these times. So let this up for a few more seconds just to see and get a glimpse of how we all feel. Okay, I still see some votes coming in here. Okay, I'm gonna close it now. and I hope you can see the results. So it seems like, yeah, most of us, 2/3, are really feeling already some of the impacts of the multiple crises we face as a global community and the changing political landscape and how that affects evaluation. And well, a quarter feels like evaluation is in survival mode. So I think with these results, we'll have a very interesting webinar today and very interesting discussions. Let me close that for now and give you a quick overview of our speakers and the agenda. So we just had some nice opening remarks from Marie-Hélène. I will give you the overview of the session right now. And then in a second, we jump into a presentation by Dr. Sven Harten of DEval Germany. We'll talk a little bit more about this global context and what kind of role evaluation can or should play in it. After that, Marie-Hélène from the Ministry, Marie Heinonen, apologies, from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, will give an overview of this newly revised guidebook, its contents for those that were not familiar with the first edition, but also the parts that we have updated and the parts that we have added. After that, we have a country representative, Dr. Bala Yusuf-Yunusa, from the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on the SDGs in Nigeria. He will talk a little bit about the value of evaluating SDGs, what it had for Nigeria of conducting some large SDG evaluations, and the impacts and influences these evaluations had for the country. Then we have the pleasure to hear from our discussant, Dr. Gonzalo Hernandez Licona from the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network, about his thoughts and reflections of what we heard today, the current context, the role of evaluation, and the guidebook. We reserved a good amount of time for you for questions and answers, around 30 minutes after that. So I will give some instructions on that. And at the end, we'll have some closing remarks and a call to action from Ada Ocampo from Ideas. Okay, one last quick note, some housekeeping rules before we jump into it. So there is a Q&A feature that should be at the bottom of your screen. This is mostly relevant for the Q&A segment later on, but if you have some burning questions already, feel free to put it in there. We are recording this webinar and we will share the recording and all of the materials and again a link to the guidebook with you afterwards. And in the meantime, please keep your microphones muted and the video deactivated so that we have all the attention on our esteemed speakers. And now I have the pleasure to hand over the microphone to Dr. Sven Harten. Sven is the Deputy Director at the German Institute for Development Evaluation, and he has over 20 years of experience in evaluation, many of which he has spent in various countries in the Global South, where he conducted numerous evaluations, was managing and conducting them himself. He also had previous professional backgrounds working at the World Bank and the European Commission, as well as an independent evaluation consultant. And Sven holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and Political Sciences. Pleasure to have you, Sven, and over to you.
Thanks, Thomas, for this kind introduction. Thanks, Marie-Hélène, also for your great opening remarks. Dear colleagues, friends, good to see many familiar names here today. To begin with, I mean, some speaking points on the global context and implication for country-led evaluation. I guess I'm bound to fail. First, because it's so complex, it's rapidly evolving, and you know, we all have lots to say about this. So hope you bear with me. We all have our own sort of experiences and opinions. I'm just gonna make a few remarks to set a bit the scene for the further discussions. So no attempt to cover this comprehensively. Well, what is quite clear that just under 5 years remaining to achieve the SDGs and the 2030 agenda, we face unprecedented challenges. And those challenges require robust evaluation approaches. And I think this guidebook is actually a milestone in helping us as evaluators, the community, but also policymakers, to move forward. And let me start with a quote from the guidebook. In today's global crises, country-led evaluations, particularly those assessing progress towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, hold significant potential. These evaluations are invaluable opportunities for enhancing accountability and transparency, two core principles underpinning good governance. So it sets the scene, but what does it actually mean, those global crises? Well, I scribbled down a couple of points that hopefully summarize them to some extent. So one is, I feel we have accelerating complexity. We've got intersecting crises, the climate crisis, geopolitical tensions, also wars, economic volatility, trade wars, and still lingering impacts of the pandemic. Secondly, unfortunately, in many countries, we witness democratic backsliding. And according to recent indices, democratic principles in many countries are under pressure, affecting governance, accountability, and the faith in traditional media, faith in science and research. And we have the rise of populist parties in many, many countries across the globe. At the same time, here where I'm sitting in Germany, in Western European countries, as well as in the Northern Hemisphere overall, development cooperation is under big pressure. It means that we have an internal legitimacy crisis, basically coming from the rise of extreme right-wing parties, populist movements, and so on. But also, we do face an external legitimacy crisis because for too long, development cooperation has ignored their colonial past and sort of colonial legacies, and has continued to act in ways that now actors in the partner countries feel this development cooperation is not legitimate anymore. And this results in resource constraints, right? In many, many countries nowadays, we're facing huge cuts in development funding. I mean, the US is just one example, but we really see this across most large donors across the globe. And to some extent, this is because of competing priorities and fiscal challenges, but also the rise of stronger national interests, like trying to do more on reducing immigration, devoting more budgets to security and so on and so forth. And so this tendency, what I'm witnessing is that, it's resulting in more fragmentation of development cooperation, less coordination, less multilateralism. And so overall, the picture, in 2015, we had this agenda about, donor alignment, harmonization, ownership. I feel that we're moving ever further away from those principles. Yet at the same time, fortunately, we learned that there's a localization imperative. So there is a global consensus that recognizes that sustainable development must be locally owned and contextually relevant. However, if combined with developing funders looking at their national interests, obviously alignment becomes a challenge. And then, as we all know, we have got the big SDG implementation gap. We're significantly behind most SDG targets, and business as usual even sort of the old business as usual won't get us there. So looking at those challenges, why is this guidebook important, and why is country-led evaluation key? Well, one is it really emphasizes national ownership. So countries must lead their own development paths to create sustainable change that outlasts external interventions, particularly when the funding of those interventions isn't secured for a longer period of time and may, as we have witnessed, dry out very, very quickly. Secondly, only locally led evaluations can properly account for the cultural, historical, political realities on the ground. Contextual understanding here is therefore key for those new evaluation approaches that we need. And thirdly, policy coherence. Country-led approaches can better identify cross-sectoral synergies, trade-offs within national priorities, but also when partner countries stand up and do country-led evaluations, they can also look at coherence across several donors. And when donors perhaps are cutting funding on their evaluation sides, the partner countries can step in and achieve coherence and looking at interventions by several donors. And last but not least, country-led evaluation is a really important tool for institutional strengthening. Building evaluation capacity can create lasting systems that support evidence-based governance, that can support democracy, can support transparency, and overall can help to put those countries on a stronger path for the future. Let me just sketch out a few things what I think are implications of this guidebook for evaluation practice. Again, this is not comprehensive, but maybe just some food for thought. So one is power redistribution. So we really must move beyond the rhetoric to generally redistribute evaluation power and resources to country actors. And I'm sitting here from Germany, and I really mean that in the future I'm looking at much more evaluations being done by our friends, colleagues, partners in other countries, looking at what development partners have been doing. Secondly, recalibration of partnerships. In a time where there's a risk that the traditional actors in international cooperation will be less active or less interested in promoting good governance and transparency in partner countries in the global south, those countries need to become drivers of the evaluation processes. Thirdly, many of us have started to work on this, but still there's room for improvement in terms of systems perspectives. So this guidebook, to some extent, along with the work of many other evaluation scholars, is an attempt to become better at including systems thinking, but also futures thinking into the evaluation practice. So as evaluations, as evaluators, we must assess not just individual interventions, but really looking at contribution to systemic and, very importantly, transformational change. Then there's the point of capacity investment. With this guidebook, we have a roadbook that can help us for sustained, thoughtful investment in evaluation capacities and capabilities at multiple levels within countries. And here at DEval, we have EVAL Connect, an ECD project where we're working towards sustainably increasing evaluation capacities in our partner countries. But this is just one. There's the GI from the World Bank. There's the important work of UNICEF. of the World Food Program and many other actors, but there needs to be this continued investment in those capacities. And lastly, again, the guidebook helps us to focus on use. So greater attention, how evaluations findings can influence policies and practice is important. And we need to get this rigorously, but timely, sometimes in real time. Sometimes we need this evidence looking forward, working with scenarios, forecasting, and really as evaluation professions, again, we need to make sure that our evaluations can contribute to policy change. So in conclusion, this second edition of our guidebook responds to these contexts with practical guidance. Country-led evaluation is not just a technically sound, but it's politically necessary. And again, a quote from this book: country-led evaluations of the SDGs can significantly contribute to strengthening governance, accountability, transparency at the national level. Countries that have undertaken these evaluations demonstrate the substantial influence that they can have on policy decisions, driving progress towards the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. Our collective challenge is to support country leadership while maintaining evaluation quality and independence. So, esteemed colleagues, the window for achieving the SDGs is narrowing, but with strengthened country-led evaluations, we can still make meaningful progress. Let's all work together on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Sven, for this very thoughtful and important remarks. Let me go back to the presentation here. Yeah, you covered a very broad array of topics. So thank you for your reflections on the implications of the current global context, the implications for development cooperations, the erosion of trust in public institutions and the media, the shrinking of democratic spaces. But also thank you for already hyping up the audience a little bit about the guidebook and what country-led evaluation can do in this new scenario and this new kind of normal, with strengthening national ownership, institutions, and capacity building, but also the redistribution of power and partnerships. So we will now hear from one of the co-authors, Nea-Marie Heinonen, more about the concrete contents of the guidebook and what we changed. And yeah, hopefully she will nicely tie that into how it can be used to combat the current challenges. So Nea-Marie Heinonen is the lead evaluation specialist and the deputy director of the Development Evaluation Unit at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. She has many years of experience in international development policy and cooperation and is specialized in planning, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Nea-Marie has worked as, she's currently working as the lead evaluation specialist and is managing the external centralized and strategic evaluations commissioned by the Independent Development Unit of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. Nea-Marie has developed various tools, guidelines, and trainings. She's always engaged and a close partner in everything about country-led evaluations of Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. She's represented in many international networks and working groups on Agenda 2030 evaluation, evaluation synthesis, evidence-based decision-making, and many others. And Nea-Marie also has plenty of experience working on the UN side. She has worked at the UNFPA Uganda country office. So without further ado, let me hand it over to you, Nea-Marie.
Thank you, Thomas, and thanks for that very generous introduction. Welcome again also on my behalf to the online global launch On behalf of all of the partners, it's my pleasure to hereby launch this second edition of the Guidebook. You will find it online, as it is a free open access resource. So this is, of course, has been made possible by the various contributions from the participating organizations and countries that have shared their experiences, for which we are, of course, very grateful. And we hope that this resource brings interesting lessons for the benefit of many others. Next one, please. So in this second edition, the partners wanted to emphasize the aspect of country-led evaluations. But what do we really mean by country-led? Of course, there's no one correct answer or definition to this. And of course, I would like to invite all participants to share your thoughts about this in the chat while we go through the presentations and different sections. That will be an interesting thing to see. But here, for our sake of the presentation, we are emphasizing that the evaluation process is led and managed by governments, yet having a participatory and inclusive approach. Just as progress towards the 2030 agenda is steered by government and the national level, its evaluation should also be the same way. Next, please. Also, what do we mean by evaluation of the 2030 agenda and the SDGs? Someone might say that there's nothing new in linking the SDGs to evaluation. But actually, what we want to underline here is that while the SDGs have been used in evaluations to some extent, what is lacking is the broader policy level evaluations that look at the national policies, strategies, programs that implement the agenda and the SDGs. Next, please. Such evaluations are interested in systems level and policy level analysis, and they really go beyond the SDGs to also include the 2030 agenda implementation and the principles that underline it. And participatory approach is very much part of that. And ultimately, with such evaluations, the aim is to enhance the national implementation of the 2030 agenda and the global goals, and also improve public policies and action towards that. Next, please. So now that we have 5 years left, there are still relatively few countries that have undertaken country-led national level evaluations. Some might say, yes, but we have completed VNRs, the voluntary national reviews. I think it's worth noting that VNRs are, of course, very valuable and important, but they are based on self-reporting, and the UN resolution calls for increasing the use of evaluative evidence. Evaluation can go beyond describing the process and status of where the country is at, and also provide information on why and how something has worked, and provide practical recommendations for going forward. Next, please. Since the first edition of the Guidebook from 2020, a lot has indeed happened, as we heard. With the second edition, the partners have responded to the new global context and also to some of the feedback received on the first edition. With some new country cases too, we hope to be able to further underline the different possibilities that exist in conducting such evaluations. Next. The Guidebook underlines the fact that all such evaluation assignments are inevitably customized to national needs and settings. The Guidebook illustrates different alternatives which are tested in practice. It also gives a step-by-step guide to considerations during the process, but also how to use the results and influence policymaking during key moments. Next, please. The content range a set of country cases and experiences, and also considerations for integrating this evaluative work into national evaluation and M&E systems. And we feature, for instance, the M&E ecosystem example from Sri Lanka. Next, please. And then also compared with the first edition, there are some new elements that we have introduced. There are, first of all, updated and additional country cases. We are privileged to be able to share some of these recent lessons from Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Uganda, as well as from Nigeria and Finland. There are also 2 new chapters, one on how to initiate such a process, gain momentum and buy-in to such evaluations at national level, and also some examples of how to use the evaluations once they've finished. We've also incorporated some aspects of gender equality, inclusiveness, and climate considerations, which are, of course, very relevant and timely going forward. Some of the key lessons include that really the key to initiating an evaluation such as this takes some few active champions that take the initiative and start introducing the idea, its benefits, and engaging with relevant decision makers. Start by having a participatory process for dialogues, and also to tailor the scope and focus of the evaluations in a way that speaks to the contextualized information needs. Also, it's important to consider the principles of the 2030 agenda when designing this type of evaluation, in addition to the SDG integration. Next. So you might have noticed the question we posed for this webinar and this event. Have we lost the battle against the time or the times in plural? No, from this perspective, we haven't. There's still 5 years to go until 2030. This is the time really to start preparing for what in program language we could say is an end of term evaluation. So the next chapter will actually be written by people such as yourselves in the audience. Some ways to engage would include disseminating the guidebook to relevant stakeholders, including government offices. You can also partner with different actors and advocate for nationally led evaluations on the 2030 agenda and the SDGs to support the UN resolution. And with this, I thank you and I hand back to Thomas.
Thank you very much, Nia-Marie, for giving us this overview of the guidebook. So I hope everybody in the audience can see there are lots of practical components in the guidebook, lots of new additions, and yeah, in general, topics that we included based on feedback on the first edition to make this guidebook answer most of the questions and make it as practical as possible to a broad audience. But we recognize, of course, also the audience here is very diverse. So we also wanted to do a quick poll again on which of the sections are most relevant to you or you think are most relevant in these times. Let me quickly launch the poll to get your insights and impressions. So you will see some of the topics phrased also as a question. Let us know what you think is most relevant or most interesting nowadays to keep evaluation and country-led evaluation relevant and up to date. So this poll, of course, requires a little more reading and thinking, probably. I will leave it open a little more. I see the live results coming in, and it's very interesting because it's almost even between all the different chapters here. Okay, I will leave it on for another 30 seconds or so. And still several votes coming in. Okay, I'll close it now in a few seconds. Thank you all for responding to this. And let me share the results. Hope you can see it. very interesting that the new chapter that we included, how to initiate a country-led evaluation, how to trigger that, actually scored very high with 40%. And of course, also the country cases. Of course, it's always important to hear practical examples from countries that have done country-led evaluations of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. We'll have one country representative talking a little bit about that in just a second. But also there's a lot of interest in the other topics as well. The design and methodological options, practical step-by-step guide. So some of you might want some guidance on how to go through the whole process from initiation up to dissemination, and of course, enabling use of the findings. A little bit behind, but also very important, communication and dissemination. And of course, the examples of uses of the evaluation. What is the value of it? And I mean, why evaluate in the first place if our findings are not used? With that, I will stop sharing. Thank you very much for participating in the poll. This leads us perfectly to our next segment to hear from Dr. Bala Yusuf-Yunusa on the value of evaluation, country-led evaluation of the 2030 Agenda and its impacts and effects on the countryside. Quickly to introduce Dr. Bala. Dr. Bala Yusuf-Yunusa is a development economist training, and he presently serves as the head of the Policy and Strategy Unit of the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on the Sustainable Development Goals. So in this capacity, he provides technical leadership and strategic policy guidance on the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs in Nigeria. Before this, Dr. Bala was engaged at the International Development, at the Global Development Institute, where he taught master's level courses on international development at the University of Manchester, United Kingdom. Dr. Bala is a very good guest who has shared and helped support and advocate for country-led SDG evaluations and the 2030 Agenda in many forums. So it's great to have him back here. And with that, over to you, Bala. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas and colleagues on this webinar. I would just like to talk through a few slides by highlighting the value of country-led evaluation from Nigeria's point of view. Next slide, please. So by way of background, Nigeria, through the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Sustainable Development Goals, is committed to the achievement of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is evident with the timely establishment of the office in 2016 to provide horizontal and vertical intergovernmental planning and coordination, representation, advocacy and partnership building, resource mobilization and management, and then finally monitoring, evaluation and reporting. To that extent, as part of that commitment, Nigeria had presented 2 voluntary national reviews until now, in 2017 and 2020. And this year we have completed the process for a voluntary national review and will be presenting in July this year. When we committed to country-led evaluation for the priority SDGs in 2019, it was done purposely for learning and accountability, and more importantly, on strengthening our voluntary national reviews so that they are evidence-based, and then we are able to inform policy going forward. Next slide, please. Part of the justification for us as a country is to see how we can strengthen overall implementation of the SDGs. And in doing that, like I said, voluntary national review, which is a follow-up, part of the follow-up review mechanism of the high-level political forum, is to make sure that the voluntary national reviews are more useful when they are evidence-based, and the only way to do that is to if you like, provide a solid foundation for a national, truly voluntary national review. And evaluation, we find it to be quite at the heart of that review process. Basically, we went out with the objective of strengthening evidence, whether what is working and what is not working, identifying key challenges, but also to hold ourselves accountable for our commitment to the 2030 agenda and what needs to happen in terms of increased investment in those areas following the finding. And of course, we talked about how not only voluntary national reviews, but also we have begun to see states working towards conducting voluntary local reviews. Last in 2023, we supported 2 subnationals to do voluntary local reviews, and those reviews are more useful when they are evidence-based, and of course, the value of evaluation. Next slide, please. So just as we were concluding on the 2 priority evaluations that we've conducted between 2019 and 2021, SDG 3 and SDG 4, some of the key findings found ways into our second voluntary national reviews. We used some of the key findings to strengthen the evidence of our second voluntary national review in 2020. We synthesized not only the 2 evaluations findings on SDG 3 and 4, but also because we reported on 7 priority reporting SDGs, we synthesized about 46 evaluations that were used to strengthen the evidence across the 7 priority reporting SDGs. But more importantly, at the moment, or since the conclusion of the evaluation and the utilization of the findings, we have begun to use the key findings and recommendations of the evaluations to inform policy formulation in the country. And I'll just give 2 examples because of the time that we have at our disposal. On SDG 3, advocacy and community sensitization has now been mainstreamed as part of, for example, the National Primary Healthcare Strategy, trying to address deeply rooted social cultural barriers that are preventing primary healthcare update. It was part of the key findings of SDG 3 evaluation that in some parts of this country, especially the northern parts, it's considered as, for example, a sign of weakness for a pregnant woman to deliver in a health facility. And so in those kind of societies, part of the broader Nigerian society, even if you provide the best health facilities, you are likely to improve maternal or institutional delivery. So these are the key findings that have come out of SDG 3 evaluation, and we're using the key recommendations and the implementation strategy to inform, to influence policy around all the strategies that will help us strengthen primary healthcare service delivery at that level. And that will help us to not only increase institutional delivery, but also reduce maternal and child mortality. And of course, we are then on the way to achieve SDG 3. And this we hope will happen and continue to happen as we move towards the 2030. On SDG 4, a classical example was once some of the key findings of SDG 4 was coming, we realized that one of the key findings from that evaluation is, should we increase investment in education sector? We are likely to achieve SDG 4 in Nigeria. So immediately following that discussion, the president of the Federal Republic at that time, President Muhammadu Buhari, at the Global Education Summit in London in 2021, committed Nigeria to increasing education spending by 50% over the next 2 years, up until 2025, targeting 100%. So this was a major influence of the evaluation findings. And this is also happening now through our various interventions of the ministries, department, and agencies to increase investment in education infrastructure. Even in our office with our special interventions, we are constructing classrooms at the primary and secondary level, even though those are the constitutional mandate responsibility of the states and the local government. So these are some of the influence of the country-led evaluation of the SDGs that we have found useful since we have concluded the pilot SDG evaluation. And more importantly, now as we move towards the 2030, we are committed to conducting another round of evaluation, so that that will be tied with most likely our last and the fourth VNR between now and 2030. Next slide, please. So this has not happened only in Nigeria, and from the understanding of the evaluation ecosystem for the SDGs since 2019, that we have been involved both at the national and global level. Sister countries, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Finland, Uganda have all, reported experiences on the influence of country-led evaluation. In Costa Rica, for example, they evaluated the national biodiversity strategy to ensure greater alignment with the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. And of course, this has happened also in Nigeria, but through the national medium-term national development plan. In Ecuador, selected national public policies on child malnutrition were focused on and evaluated, and then contributing to the SDGs that are linked to that policy. Of course, Finland, the first country in the global north to have conducted the evaluation of the sustainable development, which largely inspired some of us from the global south, have met some informed and influences in terms of their national sustainable development plan, and ensure that steady progress towards the 2030 agenda is sustained. And even the timing of the evaluation in Finland at the release of the results was carefully framed to reflect an electoral cycle in the country. So these are all examples. Uganda recently did the evaluation around the Leave No One Behind to generate data and evidence to inform policy making, both at the national and at the subnational level. Next slide. So I'm rushing because of time. Still utilization of SDG evaluation, findings in Nigeria, just carefully strengthening that it's been able to reinforce the implementation of Nigeria's Sustainable Development Goals Implementation Plan 2020 to 2030, strengthening the voluntary national reviews. I've mentioned this, and also our national development planning process is being used to promote and build evaluation capacities, to institutionalize evaluation both at the national and at the subnational level. It is all when we began this whole process of evaluating the priority SDGs that we're able to begin to identify capacity gaps and also build that along the line. We've made mention that in 2022, there's increase in the federal budget allocation to education from 4% of the gross budget to about 7%. We are continue to issue policy briefs on evaluation since the evaluation of the priority SDGs in 2021. Next slide, please. And I think I should be concluding soon. Also part of that process, Nigeria facilitated, if you like, the adoption of the standalone United Nations resolution on country-led evaluation of the SDGs, how we can strengthen voluntary national reviews through the country-led evaluation. And we were supported by 23 other countries, and this resolution was passed on in April 2023, to be precise. Next slide, please. So we have also been involved through this influence on this representation and advocacy at the global level. We've been involved in the regional, some regional participation to promote country-led evaluation of the SDGs. Some of these engagements are highlighted on the screen, like I said, culminating into the sponsorship of UNGA. So we participated in a number of meetings, workshops, and conferences. And this one that we are here today is also part of it. I think I will stop here. Next slide. And I will thank you very much for your kind attention and time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bala, for these very interesting points. And it's very encouraging to see the effects and influence the evaluations in Nigeria had. I mean, that has been hugely influential for the national strategies on health, and this huge increased investments, like 50 to 100% in education and education infrastructure. And also thank you for including examples from other countries and their basically results and successes from conducting evaluations of the 2030 agenda. Yeah, Nigeria it's true, it's a big champion and advocate for country-led evaluations of the 2030 agenda. Dr. Bala and also SDGs contributed a lot to both editions of the Guidebook. And of course, Nigeria was leading the whole process towards the adoption of the 2023 UN resolution together with 22 other co-sponsors. So thank you very much for this very interesting insights and intervention, Dr. Bala. Now let me hand over to Dr. Gonzalo Hernandez Licona, our discussant here, who will share his insights and reflections on the topic, the value of country-led evaluations and the current challenges. So Dr. Gonzalo Hernandez Licona is currently the director of the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network at the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, which is supporting over 60 countries and 20 international organizations in advancing multi-dimensional poverty tools. Dr. Gonzalo previously served as the executive secretary of EVAL in Mexico. There he led the development of the country's official multidimensional poverty metrics, which is now recognized on a global scale. Gonzalo worked with many partners across the world, including UNICEF, 3AE, the UN and other agencies, and contributed to the 2019 UN Global Sustainable Development Report. Gonzalo holds a PhD from the University of Oxford. And now we are very much looking forward to hear from you, Dr. Gonzalo, about your reflections. Over to you.
Thank you very much, dear Thomas, and thank you to all of you who are part of this event. And thank you for the invitation. I'm really lucky that I'm here because I've been witnessing the process of these country-led evaluation reports for a long time. I remember, and many of you perhaps remember, that at the beginning we didn't know what SDG was about, and of course we didn't know how to evaluate SDGs. So I remember a meeting in Helsinki where we just tried to find out the ways of measuring and evaluating SDGs. And there we had examples from Finland and Nigeria showing what they were doing at the very beginning. And now we see that these countries and other countries have done very interesting work on SDGs. And so we have now a better report, a better guideline. So thank you very much to all of you who've been part of this process. And of course, thank you to Sven and Nia Marie and Bala for your very important insights. I think mentioning everything that you said is not. I don't have enough time to stress what you said. Everything is important, but I want to just highlight some of the things that Sven and Marie and Bala just said to us. So in the case of Sven, you mentioned something that is really shocking at the moment for the world and for the evaluation community, which are the multiple problems that we have in terms of intersecting crisis and some democratic problems in countries. Populist governments taking the stage and not really regarding evaluations. So that's an important point that we need to really underline. I'm going to refer to that in a second. And as Ben also mentioned, that the importance of evaluation capacities, but also evaluation capabilities. And I want to stress that point as well in a second, that we don't want only to improve our technical elements on evaluation. We need to improve the whole country process of doing evaluations, which goes beyond the evaluation unit. So that's very important. In the case of Marie, she really stressed the point of the importance that country-led evaluations should be owned by governments, or evaluations should be owned by government. I mean, so it's good that some evaluations come from abroad, from international institutions, but the best thing we can do in terms of improving M&E and evidence in the whole world is if governments engage in evaluations. So, and not only national governments, but also how these country-led evaluations are inclusive. She also mentioned, and Bala referred to that in a very interesting point. Marie mentioned that VNRs, the voluntary national reports, are important, have been important, but they are not enough if they are not, if they doesn't include country-led evaluations. Sometimes we see VNRs which are, when you read to them, they are so nice, and you say, well, this country is wonderful, and everything is happy about that country, but it's not true. We need to include objective elements on the VNRs, and these come from the evaluation in a very objective way. In the case of Bala, the example of Nigeria is really very interesting for many aspects. One, of course, is that from the very beginning, they really get into the SDGs, improving the institutional elements of the country. So the SDG was not only a separate element of government, but is part of the government process, because the SDGs were so important that they included in the process as part of government elements. The evaluation for the SDGs, they should also include understanding and the drivers of success of how to reach SDGs. So it's not only about measuring and evaluating how the country is doing, but also getting evidence from other countries about the success and the drivers of SDGs. So in our country, we can improve and we can reach the goals more rapidly. And again, the VNRs, in the case of Nigeria, they are not only a nice document showing that everything goes well in Nigeria, but the VNRs in Nigeria take into account what the country-led evaluations showed. And in a very important way, in the case of Nigeria, is the fact that they really thought from the very beginning how they're going to use the findings of evaluations to improve public policy, to improve SDGs. And sometimes that element is not there. So these are really key elements. And let me just stress some of these points further. So in the case of the challenges that we have, that Sven really mentioned, I really want to mention not only the wars and the problems that have slowed down SDGs, but also some elements taken in some governments to not take into account not only evaluation but SDGs. So at the moment, the US government, they are not keen on the SDGs, but it is true that climate change and gender inequalities are a fact, and therefore we need to address the SDGs, even if some governments don't like it. Or in the case of Mexico, that now today, as we speak, Carnival is not there anymore, and this was a very important element for the evaluation process. And this means that from time to time we need to start all over again in terms of evaluation. Evaluation systems are not linear. Therefore, we have to find ways, if we believe in democracies, that we need to find ways to improve and to reborn evaluation systems from time to time. So at the moment, we need, I believe, as an evaluation community, to find different ways of addressing evaluations, of improving evaluations, of having evaluations again, despite the challenges that we have. In the case of the M&E systems, national M&E systems, I think it's important, again, not to have only a separate evaluation unit in the government or in the country, which doesn't pay attention to what is happening in the government overall, in the government machinery. As Denis Joban has mentioned, he's here in the audience. So it's not only about evaluation capacities and technicalities, it's also about how, for instance, the Ministry of Finance, how the Ministry of Planning, how the government is taking into account those evaluations and not having just a separate evaluation unit which produces evaluations with nothing happening. The third element I would like to stress is, of course, this report stresses the fact that country-led evaluations are about transparency and accountability. But also we have to stress the importance of learning, right? So the learning process, I believe, sometimes we need to stress it even more than the other part, because evaluations is not about judging people. It's about learning. It's about improving. And we are not perfect in what we do in government or in general. Therefore, we need to learn, and therefore evaluations are very important to do that. And finally, we need to be prepared for the next stage. Of course, we still have 5 or less than 5 years to the end of the SDGs. We need to keep working on the SDGs, but we need to be prepared for the next stage. What's going to be the next development process? And more importantly, how are we going to use evaluation to help us to go through development in the next stage? So we have to prepare, we have to say what things we did right, what things we didn't do right in terms of SDGs, what things we did right in terms of evaluation, what things we did not do right in terms of evaluation, and learn from them and be prepared for the next stage of development. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your broad reflections on the topic, Gonzalo. Again, very insightful and thoughtful comments on how evaluation needs to evolve, how we might have to rethink the role of evaluation or reinvent some parts of it, and to also refocus on the learning aspect. It's true that no one is perfect, no government is perfect, and there's a big learning component, of course, to these evaluations. So yeah, thank you for all the reflections. We are now coming to the Q&A segment. Let me just share again. Just some points on that. I see there's already a question in there. So for the Q&A segment, please add all of the questions you might have to all of our speakers, Gonzalo, Bala, Sven, Marie, and also the other co-authors of the guidebook, or maybe to the general participants here. I see that there has been some conversation already going on in the chat. To do that, click on the little Q&A button. You find it, your controls of the Zoom application. There you can see what has already been asked. You can upvote these and you can add your own question. And if you do so, if you want to direct that question to one specific person, please mention it there. Let me stop sharing. So I see that there's one question from Denis Chopin. I'm going to read it out loud. I hope all of the other speakers and co-authors connected and ready. So Denis asks, government-led evaluations often exhibit the characteristics of a public good. They produce evidence that benefits multiple stakeholders, yet few have direct incentives to fund or champion them. As a result, evaluations are frequently underinvested in, particularly within the machinery of government itself. How can the public good nature of evaluation be reframed to encourage shared investment and stewardship across ministries, parliaments, and civil society? Maybe for that, I think Dr. Bala had some very good insights on how to, best frame evaluation as a public good so that investments can be made based on the evidence that was generated across different sectors. Dr. Bala, do you want to briefly respond to that question based on your experience?
Sorry, Thomas, I just had your last sentence. What was the question about? And I was trying to check the Q&A dialogue box. I haven't seen that question. So let me understand what is the question about.
So Denise is saying that, evaluation is basically a public good. However, it's often, evaluations are frequently underinvested in, especially in the government, the big machinery of government itself. How were you able to frame evaluation as a public good? And with that reframing or this packaging, how could you encourage then or advocate and really influence all of this investment that were made in Nigeria based on the evidence found? And how can you, activate stakeholders across ministries, parliaments, and civil society?
Okay, so I think in the case of Nigeria is in our institutional framing. Like I've mentioned, we have a standalone office for the coordination of the S2030 agenda and the SDGs. And part of that mandate, we have monitoring, evaluation, and reporting. Therefore, the evaluation of the SDGs in Nigeria was well embedded in our institutional framework for the delivery of the SDGs in Nigeria. But more importantly, and also learning from that experience, so we have a Federal Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning, where we have a dedicated department on national monitoring and evaluation. So what and how those two come together when we champion the SDG country-led evaluation was to work closely with the department in the Federal Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning to work and deliver on the country-led evaluation. So we didn't run a parallel system, and it wasn't also donor-dominated evaluation. It's a country-led, and therefore the public sector resources was used to fund the country-led SDG evaluation. So that is another way of doing this, embedding evaluation, taking it as part of the mandate of the ministries, department, and agencies, and investing resources to do that. Of course, the commitment comes with the capacity to provide the needed resources to implement that evaluation. I will stop here because of time.
Thank you very much, Bala. There was another person who wanted to follow up if you could share the effectiveness of the voluntary national review. I think you spoke overall to that already a bit, the process of linking other stakeholders and by which agency definitely the VNR was led.
This is also for me.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So for us, the voluntary national reviews, while it is in the wisdom of the United Nations Economic and Social Council through the high-level political forum to hold world leaders accountable for their commitment to the 2030 agenda through the voluntary national reviews, which is the cornerstone of that review, follow-up and review mechanism. We look at the voluntary national reviews as even much more than that. It is an opportunity for us to review progress, issues, challenges, but more importantly, how to strengthen implementation going forward. We have just finished an elaborate regional consultations for our 2025 voluntary national reviews. We were in the 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria, where we discussed with key stakeholders, state and non-state actors, the civil society, the private sector, the scientific community, to understand the issues and the challenges across the Federal Republic. And for us, that process is quite enriching. It enables us to strengthen existing partnerships and build new ones. It also enables us to do advocacy and sensitization to mobilize implementation of the SDGs as we move towards the 2030 agenda. So believe me, the entire process, once is embedded in a well-structured institutional framework for the coordination of the SDGs, often the problem countries have is that a different ministry is implementing the SDGs and then asked to coordinate other ministries, departments, and agencies. So we find it's useful to have a dedicated coordinating office for the SDGs, and then you are able to work across horizontally and vertically to coordinate and mobilize resources as well as commitment for the SDGs. So the voluntary national reviews, while it's more helpful and useful when it is evidence-based and when it is conducted in an inclusive, broad-based, and participatory manner, we are using it to strengthen implementation for the SDGs.
Thank you very much, Bala. You see the country examples are always in high demand. So thank you for that. Gonzalo, over to you. And just before your response, I just wanted to note, I acknowledge some participants might maybe have problems with the Q&A function. Feel free to raise your hand if you want to voice out your question to any of the speakers. That's also an opportunity. Over to you, Gonzalo. Thank you.
Let me go back to Danny's question about the underinvestment of evaluations, right? So my belief is that if many stakeholders can take into account how they benefit themselves from evaluations, then we'll increase perhaps the investment on evaluation. So for instance, if the Ministry of Finance believes that their performance and their budget is going to be better off if we have evaluations, then there is an incentive to invest on the evaluations. If governments believe, in many line ministries believe that their work will improve and their leadership will improve through the evaluation, because through the learning process we can improve elements, then they will be better off, their institutions and themselves. So whenever we find ways in including the incentives for people to recognize the importance of evaluations for them, then if that happens, we can see more investment in evaluations.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo.
Thomas, could I just
yes.
add on to this? Thanks, Dennis. I think that's a really interesting discussion and probably not the right forum really here to go into detail, but we should do this once. I agree with Gonzalo. For me the problem is not the public good nature of it. I mean, there are a good number of examples of global public goods that receive a lot of investment, like the Human Genome Project, or CERN, like billions of dollars. or just recently, the Balkan Trust funding the evidence synthesis work. So I think, probably evaluation is not considered useful enough sometimes to get those investments. And then again, there's the problem of political will and interest. But I don't think making evaluations an exclusive good for actors that are investing would help much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sven, for these additional remarks. I saw that Ada had her hand up, but not anymore. Maybe
Yes.
you want to respond to that as well?
No, yes, I just want well, my name is Ada Ocampo from Ideas. Very briefly, because there are some other questions, there's actually a very interesting question on artificial intelligence posed by Laura. Yeah, but I would like to say that for me, a very important aspect is how the evaluation is actually initiated. From the discussions that take place to initiate the evaluation, the political decision, because actually a political decision to evaluate the SDGs, that will have technical consequences, but not the other way around. So if we follow the examples, and let me just expand a little bit what Bala has mentioned, for example, in Nigeria, to discuss and to trigger the political decision to evaluate the SDGs, many actors were convened, the parliament, of course, the government and many line ministries, other ministries like the finance, etc., but also the parliament, civil society organizations, the BOPE, international agencies as potential partners, and many other partners. They all came to the discussion and triggered the decision, influenced the government with a participatory workshop to trigger the decision to evaluate the SDGs. But these actors were not just invited for a specific activity that has an end. No, they continued in the process through reference groups to consultations, etc. And that actually gives a momentum to the evaluation where all the actors are convinced, resources were put, and a public good was ensured. So I think that when we talk about the evaluation of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, participation is key, and as Nea-Marie has said, is non-negotiable. If we talk about, we had in several workshops and webinars, participants say, no, the evaluation of the SDGs shall just be probably a meta-evaluation, where we go back to our evaluations and compile information that will allow us to see how much progress we have made towards the SDGs. Not really, I disagree, because if we are doing that, we are just focusing on the goal. But if we are really interested in evaluating the progress towards the agenda that is transformative in nature, then we should be looking at to what extent the numbers, the goals, are underpinned by principles of equity, of leaving no one behind, of resilience, sustainability, and others. So, and that is why we talk about having as unit of analysis public policies, national programs that will allow to see to what extent the SDGs has been achieved with equity, with higher levels of equities, and diminishing the gaps of equity by leaving no one behind, and other principles that are underpin the Agenda 2030. So again, I think if we keep the momentum by bringing the stakeholders together, but keeping them throughout the process, and that includes line ministries, parliamentarians, etc., then there is a possibility, high possibility, that the evaluations will become a public good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ada, for sharing your reflections on innovations as public good. I see there is another very interesting question on from Laura on AI. How can AI be utilized to support country-led evaluations? What are the risks and opportunities? I think there could be a whole series of webinars hosted on the what AI will bring to the field of evaluation. Since we only have a few minutes left in the Q&A segment, I don't think we can explore that in the depth that it would need. But I just wondered if any one of the speakers has some early experiences with that. I understand, at least from our side, we are experimenting with evaluation, with AI in evaluation, but it's still, well, it's a very powerful tool for summaries and with all the logic models, it's still not there that it can really, bring us the insight fully automated that we need for evaluations. I think it's gonna further improve, and it can be a tool that will help speed up some of the processes, but we're just in the beginning of using that in this professional field. Nea-Marie, do you have any reflections on that?
Yes, thank you. Just very briefly mentioning that our government, for instance, has been developing an open access AI-enabled tool where we can actually use some of our already done evaluation reports, which are quite lengthy, as many of us know, to actually search and filter policy relevant information that are then usable for other purposes, such as national level syntheses, evaluations, and meta-analysis, and so on and so forth. So that is an example that I can give, which will also serve not just our ministry, but also the kind of wider public and the citizens in Finland in terms of getting, improving aid transparency and accountability as well within the country.
Thank you very much, Nea-Marie, on these insights. Wonder if anyone else has any experiences with AI. Not so much. It's a powerful tool that, if used correctly for communication purposes, of cutting down some of the information for dissemination on different channels. But yeah, it still requires a lot of proofreading and checking if it's all correct. Sven, you have any thoughts to share?
I mean, so I would say the most recent models are actually already quite good to synthesize documents. So for country-led evaluations, if you have to synthesize, go through piles and piles of government documents as long as they are available publicly and in a digital format, then this could be a helpful starting point to understand sort of legislation, policy documents, or even progress reports from interventions. So I would say for as you said, Thomas, for many of the more complicated tasks, maybe not, but as a starting point for synthesis, yes. And then many of us, if you're working with quantitative data, having AI, a chatbot helping you to check your syntax, if you're working with Stata, or more importantly with R, is a great tool. Sometimes it takes really long to find that small bug in your syntax, and so or if you are already advanced, you could ask AI even to code much of it, because that sometimes it's painstakingly slow that it takes if you have to write all the code yourself. But then that one you can only do if you understand what AI is producing. So, but I guess those are two practical examples where we can already use AI. But for us, it's quite important that we work only with published documents. So I would really caution against using in internal non-public documents, stay clear of any personal information, and also sometimes the investment in buying a commercial model where you can turn off the learning function is a really smart one, because then you can at least limit sort of the risk that what you're putting in there is recorded and stored and used for learning. So proceed with caution, but some tools are quite good.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I fully agree, Sven, on that. And it's only going to get more interesting. So maybe for the next edition of the guidebook, you might find a chapter on AI in country-led evaluations in there. We'll see. We're coming to the end of the Q&A segment. I wanted to check if there are any last very burning questions or any remarks from the speakers so far before we come to the closing remarks and the call to action delivered by Ada Ocampo. If not, then let me hand over to Ada. Well, Ada Ocampo is the current president of the Ideas Network. Ada has plenty of experience working in the UN system as an evaluator, including at UNICEF, UNDP, UNFPA, and EFAT, all across the world. Basically, she was involved in several capacity building development workshops, was the founder of networks, such as the International Organization for Cooperation in Evaluation, IOCE, and the Latin America Evaluation Network, RELAC. Ada is a sociologist from Peru, who has a master's degree from the development planning and management of the University of Wales. And yeah, she lectured, she contributed to lots of tools and guidebooks, and lots of behind the scenes advocacy for country-led evaluation and the 2030 agenda. Okay, over to you, Ada, for some closing remarks and a call to action.
Thanks very much, Thomas. I will not take long because I think many things have said. I don't want to repeat them, but I would like to just remark and emphasize and probably re-emphasize the importance of acting and acting now. And why now? Not only because we are only 5 years until 2030, but also because that of the commitment the world subscribed to in 2015. And not only because of compliance, but because it's important for the world. If we are consistent in talking about the importance of transformation, the importance of the contribution of evaluation to transformational change, then country-led is a powerful tool for contributing to actual change that are transformational. Country-led is also an important tool to ensure we are really doing something that is national, that is country-led, that belongs to all the stakeholders, and this fits very well in the discussion towards decolonizing evaluation. It's rarely mentioned, but I think it's a very, very important tool. And the SDGs are very important goals that I am sure all of us would like to achieve with equity. Therefore, it is important to act and to act now. And we, with the 4 partners, DEval, Finland, UNICEF, and Ideas with this guidebook, we want to contribute to a country-led evaluation and especially country-led evaluations of the SDGs. So, and we want to walk the talk. And with this guidebook, we have been developing also workshops, webinars, and participating in different conferences. But we want to continue walking the talk. We are aware that resources are very limited nowadays. As you have already stated, evaluation is in a survival mode or is facing a crisis due to the current global context. But there are still some things that we can do, and we want to walk the talk together. Next slide, please. We would like to ask those that are representing countries, that are linked to countries, if the evaluation of the 2030 agenda has not yet been discussed or initiated, but there is an interest in doing that. We suggest that a multi-stakeholders workshop where parliaments, government, civil society organizations, including BOPES, international organizations can participate. And this multi-stakeholder actually can help raise awareness on the importance of initiating a country-led evaluation of 2030 agenda. And ideally, can trigger the decision to evaluate. This is not based in theory. This is based on practical examples, on situations that have actually happened in the second, for example, the second evaluation of the SDGs conducted by Costa Rica, the 2 evaluations conducted by Nigeria, and others. What kind of support would be needed? For example, technical advice to prepare the workshop based upon prior experience, peer support, for example, country-to-country advice, and support to manage and implement the workshop. So we, the partners, can provide some technical advice, normally online because of the constraint of resources, but sometimes we can also probably take advantage of some other trip, or in case of UNICEF, the fact that UNICEF is decentralized and has offices throughout the world. So see, if the evaluation is not yet discussed or initiated, we are suggesting a multi-stakeholder workshop, and we are offering some online, especially online support to actually organize this workshop if the country is interested. Next slide, please. If the decision to evaluate has already been taken, if the country is in this situation, we offer online technical support to possibly contribute to conceptualize the evaluation, not to act as consultants, but to ask periodically on providing some technical support, some capacity development activities that can be hands-on training or technical advice, mainly online, especially to follow the steps that are stated in the guidebook, because the guidebook actually contains step-by-step guide on how to initiate, implement, use, and ensure influence when evaluating the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. And of course, sharing practical examples. Then next slide, please. If the evaluation has already been conducted and it's in its final stage or is about to be finalized, we can provide support, as I said, normally online, regularly online, but can be some exceptions depending on the situation, to support to develop a communication plan and support to ensure evaluation influence in decision-making. Not only that evaluation will be used, that, for example, the report will be distributed throughout, it will be translated. Of course, those are very important things to do. But what we are focusing now is on how the evaluation can actually influence decision-making at the policy level, which is very important. So with this, we would like, next slide, please. Of course, general support, reference materials, real-world examples, some webinars, and as I said, capacity development activities, mainly online, or some other ways depending on resources available that now are very scarce. At the very last slide, please. What to do please use the poll and write your name. If, of course, this is not mandatory. If you are interested on this only, we will keep this anonymous. Write your name, your country, and your email. Indicate the type of support you would like, and we will contact you to receive further information. My very last closing words is, let's join forces despite of the current global context. Let's join forces to ensure that we actually work together towards evaluating the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. Thank you very much. The poll is now open.
Thank you very much, Ada. Yes, the poll is there.
Don't forget to write your name and your email and your country if you would like us to contact you. These details will not be shown publicly. We will keep them confidential, so don't worry about your details, but we will use them to actually contact you and see what we can possibly do to walk the talk together.
And since we're a few minutes over time, I'm sharing here our email addresses. Thank you all very much for joining and staying with us a few minutes longer than intended. Thanks for your contributions. Thank you especially to all of our speakers and guests, to EVALSDGs for organizing and hosting this webinar and this online launch, to Dr. Sven Harten for providing a little bit the global context and what it means for evaluation, to Nea Marie for presenting on the context, well, the content of the guidebook on behalf of all the co-authors and contributors, to Dr. Bala for providing his insights on how evaluation, country-led evaluation was influential in Nigeria, to Gonzalo as our discussant, sharing his wonderful insights on all the different topics that we covered today. And of course, to Ada for this call to action and showing the different types of supports that are available, that could be provided. I see that people are still filling out the poll. Feel free to do that. We will keep that open. We will not share the results of this one publicly. And feel free to reach out to us via the email addresses you see here if you have any other questions or need any other materials. We'll share the recording as promised, as well as the guidebook again with you. And yeah, thank you again from all of us. And I hope we hear from you soon.